Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at data encapsulation. We'll be discussing segmenting messages, sequencing, protocol data units. We'll go through an encapsulation example, and finally, we'll go through a de-encapsulation example. This episode is part of my series on Introduction to Networks. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. First thing we're going to talk about is segmenting your messages, taking that one really big message and breaking it up into smaller pieces. There's two reasons we do that. One is it increases speeds. Large amount of data can be sent over the network without tying up the communications. Now, if you sent one big message, it would take that router and use it to 100% and nothing else could get through there. And so if multiple people wanted to access that, you'd have to wait until they're done sending. And what if they're downloading a big movie or something like that? You would have to wait until they were done. The second thing it does is it increases efficiency by breaking up your big message into smaller segments. Now, when a piece of the message gets lost or gets corrupted, you have to resend that entire message. If it's one big piece, you have to resend it again because a couple bytes got lost or missing or something happened. Where if you break it up into a lot of smaller pieces, you just have to send that one piece where that corruption was found. So you get a higher increase in efficiency. Sequencing is another thing that happens here. When you break up your messages into smaller pieces, you send them out. And sometimes those messages arrive out of order. The protocol will take that and assemble it in the right order. Now, if you took a letter and you move some words around, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. And so you need to make sure you can put that in the right order. Now, if you move some pieces of a file around inside of it, change some ones and zeros around, it's probably going to throw you an error. And it's going to come up as a corrupted file. And so what happens here is we do sequencing. When we segment it and break it into smaller pieces, we put a numbering in there. And then when the receiving device gets it, it knows to put it in that numerical order. We're going to talk about protocol data units, or they're typically called PDUs. As we have this data that works up and down, especially the OSI model or in the TCP/IP model, it goes to different layers and we break it up and we take the data and we make it into segments. And then we add some data on the front of it to add the header onto that. And then we pass it down to the next layer and then we make a packet and we put the network header layer on there and we pass it down to the other one. Each piece of information we get from the above layer, we call that a protocol data unit. It's a piece of data. And so to generically talk about it, we just call it a PDU. So at each stage of the process, the PDU has a different name to reflect its new features. So it's just the data. There's no universal naming convention for PDUs. The PDUs are named according to their protocols. As we look here on this diagram, we can see here that the data here at this layer is called a segment, and then we have a packet and we have a frame here. Looking at that, if we were look at the OSI model, this would be layer 4. Layer 4 has segments. Layer 3 is the packets. Layer 2 has frames, and then layer 1 is the physical layer. So what happens here is the OSI model, it takes the data and we put a transport header on it. When we put that transport header on it, it's now a segment. Then we take that entire piece of information, pass it down to layer 3. At layer 3, we put a network header on it. That network header with all that information that was passed down from layer 4 is called a packet. Then we take that information and we pass that down to layer 2. All that information that includes the network header, the transport header, and the data, we now at layer 2 put a frame header and a frame trailer on there. That makes us our frame, so we call that a frame. There, we take the information from above us and we pass that down. So PDUs, they're called, this is the name of the PDUs here in this column. They're called data up here that we get from the upper layers. Then at layer 4, it's called a segment. Layer 3 is called a packet. Layer 2 is called a frame. And then we have the bits that actually go over the network, the ones and the zeros. And so that's what the protocol data units are. And then when I say protocol data units, you can think, well, what layer in the OSI model am I talking about? And that's what we're looking at. So here's an example of encapsulation. The web server is sending a message to the client. It's sending back a response saying, this is your web page. And we start with the data. We put the data here. So this is called the user data. Then we put a header piece on here. And this entire piece here is called the TCP segment. Then we pass it to the next layer. We put some IP address information on it, source, destination. This whole thing here is called the IP packet. Take that, and then we pass it down to the next layer. We encapsulate that. And then that entire thing here with the header, and once again, it gets a trailer here. That's the Ethernet frame. Once we encapsulate it with all the encapsulations, with the TCP information, the IP information, the Ethernet, then we can put it on the wire and send it across, or wherever our media is. Then, on the other end, the client needs to de-encapsulate it. So it gets this message of ones and zeros. And then we go up and we take off the Ethernet part. Maybe this is the Ethernet part here. And we have a couple trailers there. Then we take off the IP address part. We take off the IP address part. And then we pass it up to the next layer. We take off the TCP part. And that just leaves us with the data. And now once we have the data, we can then format it and then present it to the end user in form of their web page they asked for. So the sender encapsulates it, the receiver de-encapsulates it. It takes all of that extra header information off, stuff we used for it to get there. We take that off, and then we just get the data at the end. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on data encapsulation. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on Introduction to Network. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode on my series on Introduction to Networks. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.